I'm Sarah Thewlis, Chair of the REC board, and delighted to be chairing this session. We're actually looking at building strategies, building confidence, and building your business. I'm delighted to have a really strong team that are going to support me on this. And I'm sure you've read all their CVs as they've come through. But we've got Allison Humphreys. Allison's got over 30 years in the recruitment sector, working as a managing director and director of sales and operations. She's established a specialist consultancy since 2002, working with businesses right across the sector. So I can't think of anybody better to kind of talk about how we're going to build and take things forward. One of the things that Allison told me about that you probably don't know, I told you she was very productive, but she managed to have 4 children in 4 years, which I think is pretty impressive, Alison. So you're obviously really good at time management. Then I'm delighted to welcome Heather Solway, who's actually a fellow colleague on the REC board. Heather is a very experienced non-executive director and consultant. She's a fellow of the CIPD, has done a huge amount of work in terms of people, performance, and all areas like that, and is really, really good. And I'm embarrassed to say that she's actually got a terrible thing that she told me about. And Heather, I'm so embarrassed. I'm going to make you say what it is.
I'm a closet Love Island fan.
So there we are. We get everything that comes along here. And then Graham, delighted to see you. Graham's obviously worked in the recruitment industry, I think, for over 35 years in terms of what he's done within the service industry, and has done a huge amount in terms of sort of job creation, creating wealth, and a whole number of areas like this. So I'm really looking forward to sort of chairing this session in terms of the things that we're going to be doing. And the first way we thought we'd start off with is actually, and I think, Heather, you're coming in first, is really thinking about what your experience has been of growing businesses successfully. So over to you, Heather.
Thanks, Sarah. And welcome, hello to my fellow guests. So I'm part of the Jump Advisory Group, and we're a group of people with lots of experience in recruitment and growing businesses and MBOs and buyouts and exits and that sort of thing. But my background, I've only joined them this year. My background was with Engage Specialist Recruitment Group. So I worked for 10 years leading their people strategy. And during that time, we grew from 1 recruitment business to 10 years later, 18 recruitment businesses. We went from being entirely UK based to working across 4 continents. So working in Europe, in Australia, working across multiple states in America, and I think the last acquisition we made just as I was leaving was in Holland. So lots of experience, particularly with international growth and moving away from being UK centric. So tiny businesses right the way through to established businesses.
That's really helpful. Alison, how about you?
Yeah, so thanks very much, Sarah. I started in recruitment, I think, when the earth was still cooling, with a business that was just shortly after I joined, was acquired by Hays. And that was the first step that Hays made into recruitment at that point. They were, in fact, a shipping and chemicals company up until then. So it was a really exciting time. And I had 10 years with the big umbrella, if you like, of Hays, but plus all the funding that became available. So I had the very great fortune early in my career to be able to start and grow not 1 but 2 significant businesses from scratch, but with that safety net, if you like, of still being under the Hays umbrella. And I did something similar with Robert Half, and later on moved into recruitment process outsourcing, statement of works, which is a whole different sell and took me to a whole different level. So I established my advisory business based on all my experiences of growing businesses and from either startup situations all the way through to successful trade sales. And I've completed successful trade sales relatively recently, and fundraising, with working with clients, owners of and directors of recruitment businesses, you name it, everything from social work and healthcare through to international DevOps specialists. And I've been, able to bring all that experience of actually doing it in real time in the relatively recent past to help those people.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alison. And Graham, how about you?
Oh, hi, everyone. Well, like so many people, about 30 years ago, I more or less accidentally fell into recruitment. I was doing some consultancy work for what was then called HMS. It's now called JARC Recruitment. I think you would know it as. As a result of the end of that, the then CEO said, do you fancy a proper job? Don't be a consultant, come and start with us. So my first appointment actually in recruitment was actually as service director. But since then, I've gone back down again and run a desk. And then I've worked my way back up again to be UK operations director in what you now know as Impellum. And during those years, I've done 23 startups in the recruitment world. I've done opening branches for an existing business. I've opened and sold my own branches on my own business, which I subsequently franchised and sold franchises as well. And then went back into corporate in 2006, which is where I still am, and set up an RPO for the talent group. So right now I've only got one customer. It's called Talent. It's very demanding, but in all my years of experience, I've certainly seen a lot of different ways of starting up and succeeding in businesses. And I have to say, it's been a massive learning experience. I was going to have a look and see how many of the 23 startups I've done are still open and working, but I decided not to, just in case.
That's really helpful and very honest, Graham. I say fantastic breadth of experience the three of you bring. Obviously, looking at the majority of businesses that we have within the UK, the majority of them have 7 or fewer employees. So what do you think is the main reason that these businesses fail to scale and get bigger? Because obviously some of those other the now big businesses must have started off as small businesses at some stage. But what are the barriers? And I don't know, Graham, do you want to go first with that one?
Well, I suppose there's quite a lot of reasons, but in my experience, what I've seen is probably lack of ambition. I think a lot of people, a lot of owner managers, when they get to sort of 6, 7, 8 employees, their business is probably trading quite profitably. It's become almost a lifestyle business, and they're already looking after 5, 6, 7 years of probably selling it to one of the big corporates. And perhaps they don't want to scale. The other thing that I would say about that, particularly if they're running a contractor book, is cash flow is absolutely imperative. And as I've seen myself when I've tried to grow contractor businesses, the lack of cash can be massively prohibitive. Of course, you don't get that in perm recruitment. Well, cash flow, I think, is imperative. Ambition, I think, is absolutely imperative. And I think it's about the mindset of the owner manager. And I think if people engage their team properly and motivate their team properly and have a succession plan properly, that can either lead as a springboard to growth or a springboard to sell the company. It all depends on the owner manager and whether or not issues.
Okay, that's helpful. Alison, how do you see it from your view in terms of what Graham said? Similar or different?
Actually, I'd like to take and build on what Graham just said about lack of ambition. One of the things that I observe, and it is, you're right, at the early stages, it's absolutely down to the behaviours and planning of the recruitment business owner or owners. But one of the things that I encounter quite frequently is people who've set up businesses and they fail to understand that there is a significant difference between being a good recruiter, a great recruiter even, and on the other hand, running a great recruitment business. So, great client relationships is not going to build you a significantly sized recruitment business. That said, there are many great businesses that are small and provide a great reliable income for those who are involved, and there's nothing to be ashamed of. But if you are looking to build something that has capital value, you need to understand that difference. And in some cases, there's a little bit of what I described as moonshot thinking. So we will grow to be the market leader in our sector and the most respected, and we'll have 100 people. But importantly, no plan as to how to get there.
Yeah.
And, you know, I grew up in the 1990s when there were a lot of books about, you know, leadership being all about charisma and vision, but actually without a plan, that's meaningless. So those would be the first things I'd pick out.
Okay, that's helpful. Heather, so we've got cash, ambition and a plan. What would you like to add into that stop businesses failing to scale?
Alison, I think you're absolutely right about the plan. One of my colleagues at Jump says that he thinks that leaders spend too much time in the business and not enough time working on the business. So it's that, you know, having a plan and then having the ability to execute on that plan. And I think sometimes people who've run desks successfully and been great recruiters aren't always willing to ask for the help and support they need to execute on their plan. So even if they have one,
Right.
And actually there's a lot of help and support out there to help them respond to changing markets, to think about succession planning, to think about their infrastructure. And it's having almost the humility to actually reach out and say, I've got this ambition, help me achieve it.
Okay, that's really helpful, and it's interesting. There's some common themes running through between the three of you. So I think that the next area, which I think helpfully my notes say should be the meat of the discussion, is very much around if you had to give a business owner or a director 4 to 5 key pointers for growth. What would they be? And I think because recruitment covers so many areas, it would be helpful is if you could kind of give us some examples of how you've been able to do that and where. So Alison, I think I come to you first now, just working round on this way. Okay, so over to you.
Okay, so the first thing, if you're looking to really build a significant business, is do understand what buyers look for. Now, they may not come along in their time frame, but it makes sense because all the things they look for are the vital signs of a good business. You know, the best laid plans, etc. If we encounter another pandemic when somebody thinks, oh, I'm going to be ready to sell on that day, you need a business that is still resilient, don't you? So those points are fairly well rehearsed, obviously. You know, high levels of productivity, visibility of where your revenues are coming from, not over invested in one client, good cash management, and no divas who effectively the business entirely relies on. Just a few. Those arguments are quite well rehearsed. But just to add to that, I would say, apart from grow the business, grow a healthy business rather than just a business that you want to sell. If you get as far as a buyer expressing an interest, they will go through a due diligence process. And if that business is starved of investment and is going to require significant spend or has significant liabilities, for example, because you have neglected compliance, might be a good example, then they will spot that, and it may scupper the sale, or it will certainly reduce the multiples that you can possibly achieve in a trade sale, or indeed an MBO, even where people know what they're buying, if you like. And the other piece I would say is do make sure that you're not just a Me Too recruiter who's doing exactly the same thing as everyone else. Now, it's almost impossible to be unique for about more than about 30 minutes in the recruitment space. But what you can do is measurably and demonstrably do something better than your competitors. And saying that you do it better doesn't really hack it. You need to be able to actually provide evidence of that statistically via accreditations, by independent observation. So to give you an example, I was formerly the managing director of a recruitment business that I grew from 800 contractors to 1,800 contractors in 2 years. And one of in that market, which was social work, not social care, but social work, compliance and having really clean files on all your candidates is absolutely critical. And it was one of the things that prior to me being there, you know, the business had kind of got away with things. And And it was really important to me that we were able to demonstrate consistently that our compliance processes were absolutely watertight, because that's a really important factor for winning new clients in that market, as well as removing liabilities for when we eventually sold. And the other thing was to be able to produce, in that particular example, I created a statement of work business, which none of our competitors were doing, which addressed a specific need in a way that was really cost effective for clients, but also very profitable for us. So that was something that was significantly better and different from our competitors.
That's really helpful, Alison. A really good example around that, about making something that was specific to that business, but you actually had a really strong quality and compliance piece to it. Heather, what about you? Because I guess this is the sort of space that you're operating in now, isn't it? Is supporting a range of different businesses that have ambitions.
It is, yeah, it is very much from businesses that are startups, who are just working out what they want to do, which is a completely different proposition from those businesses that we deal with that have been around for 2 or 3 years. And I think at the moment, one of the really important things for people to understand is how much the market has changed and how much that means they need to go and revisit their plan. So there will be people running businesses and setting up and starting businesses who have only ever worked in a job short market, and who don't understand that a candidate short market means that they need to work in different ways, and they need to focus and center their business around different things. And so for me, the real challenge at the moment for growth is to help those business owners to look at their plans, to look at their strategy and the execution of it, and say, okay, what's changed? What do I need to do differently to grow in the current market? Because what I was doing 2 years ago isn't going to be appropriate anymore. And it's that, as human beings, we're quite resistant to change. And so we can sometimes struggle with that, needing to quickly revisit and say, okay, I'm going to put aside all of that, and actually I'm going to have a fresh start to think about that. And really to understand the implications that has for the people in those businesses, so for their teams. Right. So they may have been rewarded and targeted in a particular way, and then might need to be revisited. So are our commission structures, for example, still focused on the right behaviours, or do we need to rethink that? Are we really listening to what our clients and our candidates are saying about what's important to them, so that we can respond? So for me, it's about really focusing on what's different, what's changing, and being responsive to that and listening.
Heather, that's really interesting, especially around that whole compensation aspect, in terms of how you go in to have potentially some quite difficult discussions with people about it if you want to change things. So what sort of support would you be able to give owner managers to be able to do that if they've worked out that they're paying for things the wrong way round, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think it's about, for me, it's about the communication piece around it. People are sometimes afraid to give difficult and challenging messages to people because so quite a lot of what we're doing is giving our leaders the confidence in their ability to take their organization with them. But actually, it just because it's a difficult conversation doesn't mean it's a valuable conversation or a worthwhile conversation. And that sometimes you just got to still yourself and do this stuff. And at the moment, that's particularly challenging, Sarah. So let's face it, we're all, every recruitment business is hiring. You're frightened of losing people, but actually changing a commission structure so that it focuses on the right behaviours doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, does it? It can be actually about creating new opportunity and new success for the business. So it's about helping leaders understand how to position obviously we do all the work on designing the schemes properly, but the messaging around it and their own development as leaders to have the confidence to have those difficult conversations, and then obviously in a safe, legal way.
Yeah, okay, that's helpful. Graham, how about you? Because you've obviously got a massive track record of history of working with some very different businesses. So in terms of some of these smaller scale ones, i.e. the sort of owner-director and they're under 7, what are your thoughts around how you've helped businesses like that?
The very, very first thing I wrote down, just in preparing a few notes to answer this question, is have a plan. And I double underlined it and put an exclamation mark on there. Unless you're very, very lucky in the recruitment world, that you don't grow your business without having a plan. And I put down 3 or 4 key pointers as to what I think from my experience works. And one is ensure that you know the market that you're going for and don't diversify until you've built on your strengths, is one of the first things I wrote down. Plan the cash flow. I can't emphasize enough, particularly if you've got a contract, how important cash is. To me, before you start spending a lot of money on good marketing campaigns, you need to have probably 3 months worth of cash in the bank to operate your business with, and never underestimate that, because it's very, very easy to spend lots of money on marketing. I think you should drive hard and don't give in. What you do as a leader or as an owner manager of a small business reflects massively onto your team, and you need to be pragmatic and try something new if things aren't working. But for me, the thing that's always worked the best is to engage the team in the plan. Do not keep it to yourself.
Right. Okay.
Tell them the message every single day. Review it at the end of every single work day as well. It only needs to be 5 minutes, but engage the team in the plan. They need to know how important the expansion is and what it will mean to them. It will create job opportunities for them. In our industry for years and years and years, and I remember it in the 90s and the noughties, we had a branch manager, 3 salespeople and an admin. And we told them all that you can all be a branch manager. And we told all the branch managers you can be a recruitment area manager. And we told all them you can be a director. Well, it's not like that. Engage the team in the plan, chase the common goal, and you should incentivize your team, praise them, let them share the success. It's not all about you. And what are you going to do if three of them leave when you're halfway through? And we all know from our experience in the industry that people can easily steal your ideas. So the way to keep the team engaged is to do just that. Engage them, set them objectives, set them targets, praise them, incentivize them, and be positive yourself. I think it was Heather that just said about leadership. For me, that's absolutely 100% of the way to growth. Plan it, lead it, but for goodness sake, take the team with you and listen to their feedback.
Okay, thank you. It feels like we'll come on to cash in a minute, because I think cash is important, but all of you have kind of mentioned the importance of having a plan. So, and I think it may have been Heather, you mentioned that one of the things that, people need to be bold enough to ask for support and humble enough to ask for support. So perhaps you could all have a little think about how do you actually go about, 1, doing that, and then 2, finding the right sort of support to help them. So Heather, do you want to kick off with that? And then perhaps Graham, and then perhaps Alison.
Interesting question, Sarah. So there is a degree to which the right kind of support, there has to be some personal chemistry there. So quite a lot of the time, and I'm sure this is true for Alison and Graham as well, is that your initial conversations with people are really just about establishing if you're going to work together well. And it's as much for the advisors to work out whether they want to work with the clients as it is for the clients to work with the advisors, because for all of us, it is about working with people where the chemistry is going to be right and the partnership's going to be right. So there are some organisations that I know I can add value and I can work with them and I can help them. Whereas there are other organisations that I would refer on to one of my colleagues, or I would actually say, I think you need a different skill set of support. So I think advisors who are willing to be honest and say, actually, I'm not the right person for you, rather than that just going to take all comers, is really important. So testing out your advisors and having that debate and that conversation. And actually, that's much easier these days because we can do it on Zoom, can't we? So we can have, without traveling halfway across the country, we can talk to somebody. So and look at people who think about what it is you need support with. Think about what your gap is, and seek out advisors who can help you with those specific things. And there is quite an exercise to be done sometimes to work out what you need, what your support level is. So take time to choose your advisors, and don't commit too long don't commit to a 3-year relationship. Because your needs will change, and it's important that you can take a relationship with an advisor to fill the gap that you've got.
Okay. Alison, how about you, just in terms of that positioning, that advice piece, and how you'd go about doing that? What do you think are key questions that somebody coming to you looking for help should be asking? Okay.
So one of the obvious ones is, like, have you got a track record? Have you personally done this?
Right.
And, even if the advisor that you're speaking to has personally done it, I would still add on what Heather just said, that, that doesn't necessarily make them right. Because there are some people who just aren't good at passing on that information, or they may have successfully, for example, achieved a trade sale, but they've only worked in one company, and that won't equip them to know how your company should get there. You cannot just like cookie cutter the whole thing, because every business is starting at a different stage, in a different market, with a different DNA. And that's really important, actually, that an advisor should respect that DNA and even unearth what it is, because it's not always apparent to you if you're that close to the business, if you own it. Sometimes it takes that challenge. So, first, but I do think a track record is indispensable, but it has to combine with the right approach for you. My second thing is I'd say be very clear, which may involve you shopping the market, about what kind of support you need in terms of its structure and delivery, not just the subject matter. So there are, for example, a lot of people out there that I would classify as trainers, who will train your staff to be good recruiters, but they haven't necessarily run a recruitment business. And therefore their knowledge of that aspect is going to be theoretical at best. There's also quite a significant number of like peer-to-peer networking organizations that are run by people who may be able to offer some advice, but remember, running the peer-to-peer networking association is their primary business model, not offering advice. So the clients that I work with obviously choose me because that is my business model. Other people may choose differently, but they choose because they know they're going to be working with I work with a limited number of people in a very structured way, and that they're going to get enough of my attention and support with implementation, rather than me, well, I'm sorry, I'm busy running my club today, or whatever it might be. Those are things that spring to mind.
I'd reiterate all of those things, Alison.
Graham, how about you in terms of people when they're looking for advice, what they should be looking for?
Assuming that a typical owner manager is a member of the REC and taking advantage of everything that we can offer, of course, and is also looking at any other streams of information that come from recruitment, of which there are many. Let's just take the example of somebody working in, say, construction. Let's have a look at some of the main drivers in there. Let's join the health and safety executive, for example. Let's look at what's important in the industry that we are actually performing in, because the governance and compliance is immense. So keeping abreast of all that is a good place to go for advice. From a personal basis, I think I'd say be strong with yourself. Look in the mirror and say to yourself, what are my weaknesses? And once you know what your weaknesses are, then you can start to go and ask for help. And that is a tough question. And I think it was something that Heather and Alison have touched on there. But anybody that thinks they know it all in any business, but especially recruitment, is in for an extremely rude awakening. And if you don't know what your weaknesses are, ask your wife or your boyfriend or your girlfriend or your mum or your dad or your kids. But ask, because you'll get some very surprising answers. I did a 360 degree on myself amongst my own family, not business colleagues, and I was amazed. So I did it every 10 years. I've done it 3 times and I don't get any better, I can tell you. But this is really, really important stuff. If you don't know what advice you need, how do you know where to go for it?
Okay, so it sounds like honesty is really important in terms of that side. Yeah, that's quite an interesting thought, 360-degree appraisal on the family.
I'm not asking my kids what they... I'm not asking my kids.
Graham, one of the things that you've mentioned, you know, I always talked about leadership, having a plan, all of that side, is the whole issue around cash. And I just wondered if you could probably give us about 3 or 4 pointers. You said early on you need at least 3 months supply of cash or coverage, but how else should people be thinking about that?
Well, the way, by the way, the only reason I said 3 months is because if you're going to grow a business, you need to focus on that. You don't need to be worrying about whether or not you can pay all the bills. That's the reason I set it at 3 months. But the cash flow part, I just can't. I can't underestimate it because it's so important. Anyway, to answer the question, I suppose to start with, it's probably better to work in the permanent recruitment industry. Because there's very, very little risk there. And of course, you're working with 100% margins, whatever you earn is exactly that. And it's very easy, therefore, to work out what your costs are and what your projected profit is going to be. And if you need, of course, to go and borrow any cash, or you need some sort of overdraft, or you're going to use any factoring company, to have all that detail and knowledge right at your fingertips is very important, because what impresses people is the fact that you know your numbers. How many times have we seen people look absolutely sick on Dragon's Den because they don't know the numbers? I find it so aggravating. I just can't tell you when people don't know what their margins are. So, you know, you build your business on a solid foundation. I know it's old-fashioned, but that's what you need to do. You know, these things work. It's as simple as that, Sarah.
Yeah, okay, that's really helpful. Heather and Alison, did you want to add anything? It looks like, Alison, you do, around the cash side.
I add a point on that cash thing. So there's a lot of expectation, I've noticed, among people who are relatively inexperienced in the recruitment sector now, that they're going to join a business and they're going to become equity shareholders in that business very early. Now, there are lots of routes by which, of course, you can secure the long-term loyalty of and interest in the business of key personnel. But I quite often find myself having to help business owners unpick decisions that have been made very early on to give away either share options to people who do not grow with the business, or even worse, to actually give away equity to people whose whose whole aim in life subsequently changes, and they are genuine shareholders in that business, and they don't want to work there anymore. They want to take it in a completely different direction. And unpicking those arrangements, which are usually very well intentioned at the outset, it's very hard to do. Not a lot of people realise this. So I've had business owners who have given away actual equity, business owners who have signed people into an EMI scheme far too early a stage, and then they haven't got enough in the way of share options to attract and reward people later on, who they have to bring in sometimes at a more senior level, and committing themselves to commission plans that are very, very short term. Now, there seems to be some sort of inherent belief that you can never change your commission plan as well. Well, we've seen just how much market conditions can change, and everybody should make sure that their commission plans are capable in their policy of being changed. So I could go on endlessly about this one, but watch out for over reward. It's very easy to give away some, what looks like 5% of nothing when you're a startup business. You might come to regret that later on, from people who are saying, can I have another 5% this year and another 5%?
That's really interesting and very insightful, Alison, I have to say. That is. In terms of we've got the idea of the plans really important, having the ambition, and we talked a little bit about a certain amount of sort of humility in terms of being able to ask for advice. So I think finally, what skills do you think recruitment business leaders need today, where we are now? Because obviously there are going to be some people on this who are still working for other people, but have got an energy and an inclination to want to set up on their own, because that's what happens. So, Alison, what would you say would be the sort of the key skills that recruitment business leaders need today?
actually, to be really honest, I think people have higher and higher expectations of their leaders than they've ever had.
Yeah.
So leaving aside the commercial acumen aspects, because I think we've kind of handled that, I'd boil down through maybe three key things. Number one is the ability to learn and learn fast. And that in business, learning means adapting. There's no point just knowing things. You've got to do something with what you've learned, isn't it? So
yeah.
that ability to learn and adapt quickly to rapidly changing markets. Second, I think they need to be able to balance a drive for results with an awareness of keeping people with them. And we've all seen people who go too far to one of those extremes. Yeah, one's all about relationships and the other one's all about results. And that can turn a lot of people off. And they don't always get the best results because the relationships aren't right. And then the third thing, and this goes more into the, it's a marathon, not a sprint piece, is that a good leader now, I think, needs to be able to look after the whole of their business, but also look after their own well-being, because they won't be able to sustain it all the way through to the finish line unless they are managing themselves, if you will, as well. So some quite big areas there.
There are some big areas in there. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Heather, what for you do you think are the key skills?
For me, they're two totally different things. So one is about that, and I think it links to what Alison just said, that emotional intelligence piece to be able to balance the needs of your people and the needs of your business, and to understand and focus on behavior and mindset and values and rewarding the right things and being very clear about, how that threads through everything you do. So there's a very kind of, it sounds fluffy, it's not fluffy at all. It's very, but it's very important. And then the other thing I think it's really important is for recruitment leaders to be at the cutting edge of digital and technology. This business is moving very, very fast, and the tools at our disposal are changing. And so you've really got to understand digital and technology and know what's out there and watch it moving very fast and take advantage of it at the right moment.
Okay, thank you. Graham.
Yeah, I think for the owner manager who's trying to grow, I would say energy and optimism, absolute prerequisites to this. Your own personal energy is what sets an example to your team. It's what creates the culture. And it's what makes people want to follow you and to follow the lead that you're going to take in growing your business. If your own people don't believe you, your customers have got no chance. You need to have all of that behind you, because what happens, you're going to be out knocking on doors and selling, but somebody isn't going to phone you. They're going to phone the office, and that person is front of office. They need to believe your culture. They need to believe your values, and they need to have your energy and optimism to keep going. I do actually believe in reading self-help books, just going back to that advice thing, because it's pretty lonely at the top. I mean, who do you ask? Or do you go home and drink a cocktail and kick the wife or the dog? But it is hard. So it's really important to have the team focused. They need to believe your culture. They need to believe your commitment and your values. And I think that's very, very important, because they're front of house as well as you. And always be optimistic. And in this way, we don't make a sale every day. But when we do, we need to take that in a modest fashion, and we need to accept our defeats when we don't, philosophically, and learn from it. But without the team behind us sharing our belief, and without us leading with energy and optimism, I think it's a far harder task to grow a business than it is if you're all singing from the same hymn sheet.
That's really helpful. Now, I think the chat's either silent or I can't see it. So I think we've got a few more minutes so we can kind of carry on. But, you've talked a lot about having a sort of personal insight, personal energy. So I think it would be sort of useful to hear from the three of you. What's the best lesson that you've ever learned in the time that you've been involved with the industry?
Ooh.
Heather.
Wow.
Okay. So at Engage a few years ago, as we were growing very, very quickly, we decided to embark on outsourcing. And I have to tell you, I was very, very reluctant to be involved in that project. And I was convinced by other people that it was a good idea. I learned so much from that experience, and it was a project that took place. It was a rolling project over a couple of years, and I am now solidly a believer that there is a place for outsourcing in the recruitment industry. And I learned so much about how to do it well and how to do it badly, and the pitfalls, and the real strength of an outsourcing model in recruitment. And so I think that was the biggest lesson for me, because I firmly went into it believing it was a bad idea. And I have had my opinion reversed fully by the experience of doing it. And I really see and understand the value of doing it well.
Okay. So that was a bit about taking a risk and also being prepared to change your mind. Feel like
100%. I wasn't right. I didn't know everything. And it was a very, very useful lesson. And I learned enormously from it.
Yeah, no, okay, thank you. Alison, how about you in terms of the best thing that you learned or are still learning?
I'm just doing the time check here because I could definitely fill another 45 minutes. Right, so very quickly, I think on a personal level, probably the most, and I'm still learning this one, is you can't do it all yourself. And it took me a long time to get there because I started my career believing that I was the person who could do things better, quicker, faster, more expertly than anyone else. So good delegation at a personal level. At a business level, I think the most important lesson is that in recruitment, it's not enough, frankly, to just say, oh, we're different because we won't waste your time with irrelevant CVs. That doesn't really differentiate you, and nobody believes it anyway. So there's a whole book behind that. But I won't take it anymore.
No, that's lovely. Thank you, Alison. Graham, how about you?
Well, the biggest lesson I've learned is a bit of a negative one, but it worked in a very positive way. And it was when HMRC changed the law on third-party VAT. Back in 2005, and I was doing the VAT for my franchisees to be rudely told by our friends at HMRC, you can't do that anymore. You've got 6 months to change your business model. But the franchisees were contracted. It cost me a six-figure sum to get out of that. And that's probably why I'm so incensed with things like cash flow, make sure that you covered. And of course, governance, corporate, make sure you know what you're doing. Make sure that you know exactly what HMRC is about to do if you can. But I suppose my final message from all of this and 30 years in recruitment is, enjoy it. Have some fun because it's a great business.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so one question's come up in the chat now, which is about a recognition that the market's changing, but how can you kind of keep flexible and up to date? What's the best way that you go about doing that? So perhaps one thing from each of you, and then I think we're done. So, Heather, do you want to start first about how you keep yourself up to speed?
There is masses of information out there. Be open to the information that's out there. So seek out. There are people running webinars. There are specialists. Network with your colleagues. Talk to other recruiters. Just communicate and be open and listen to what's going on rather than staying in your own lane.
Okay, thank you, Alison.
I completely agree. Get your Periscope up, but also, for goodness sake, use reliable sources of information like the REC that are properly researched rather than basing things on just anecdote and hearsay.
Okay, thank you. Graham?
Absolutely support what Heather and Alison have said. I would also suggest that you go and talk to your customers. Ask them what the main drivers are in their businesses, what's affecting them, what's happening in their industry, and what do they see as their risks. And then you can work out, perhaps, a plan to help them.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, the three of you. I mean, that was sort of like Dragon's Den, a bit of 360, blind dating and whatever, all put into one in terms of
Love Island.
Love it. Yeah. Do you know, Heather, I wasn't going to say that. I think, one of the things that's come through very clearly is the huge amounts of energy and commitment that the three of you have to the businesses that you work with. And that feels like a really important piece in terms of sort of finding the right advisor. And I guess taking the challenge and making them ask difficult questions of themselves and also of other people, because I guess I like to use the analogy of pearls and oysters, and the way they come is there's got to be a bit of grit in that to actually make the change. So thank you very much. I think we could give you a virtual round of applause or something like that. And now I think that's the end of this session. And then I think we're back to the live stage where we've got the keynote speaker of the president of the CBI, Lord Borimori, who's also going to talk about diversity and inclusion and some of the impact as far as the market's concerned. So thank you all very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.